Hey guys, it's Glenn here from dr00. Just wanted to give you a quick update as to what's been going on and why you may not have heard us in recent weeks while the podcast is meant to be coming out. Just due to a few different factors, and in particular sort of finalising my studies and finding new accommodation and moving away from home. I've just found it a bit too challenging to be able to put out the quality podcasts that we always hope to do. However, this particular episode has been sort of sitting in the archives for a little while now. We recorded it maybe about a month ago, where I had the pleasure of sitting down with Drew, one of the prominent deck builders from the Marvel Champions community, and really get to, pick his brains about how he deck builds and why he deck builds a certain way, and just talk about one of his more recent decks in the form of Captain Marvel Protection. This, of course, came out before the Ant-Man pack, and so a lot of the context is around how that hero performs both into Red Skull and Kang. But overall, it was just awesome to sit down with a player such as Drew and really let him have the platform to share how he deck builds and what he thinks about the game. And yeah, I really enjoyed my time talking with him. And so I hope that you also will enjoy your time with Drew as I present to you the Experimental Research, Episode 4, revolving around Captain Marvel Protection. Thanks, guys, and just expect the podcast to continue in a regular fashion from this week onwards before we have a break around Christmas time. Thanks once again, and enjoy this episode. Welcome back, everyone, to Experimental Research, a Marvel Champions deck building series by Alter Egos with myself, Glenn. And with me, we have a very special experienced guest that a lot of you in the community will know. He goes by the handle Drew. So, Drew, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. How are you?
I'm not too bad. It's, I guess for me, it's going evening time, but for you, it's later in the evening. I guess for those in the community that don't know who you are, do you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and just where you're located?
Okay, yep. So my name's Drew, as you said. I live in New Zealand, down way down. You can't find us on maps usually. I live in the land of Middle Earth with all the orcs and goblins and everything. And then sometimes I play games like Marvel Champions as well.
Yeah, and the occasional times that you do play Marvel Champions, it seems like you always have a latest and greatest write-up for the community. So if those are interested, Drew does a lot of in-depth write-ups for various decks on the deck builder. I think most recently you did a Hulk build. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. It's so easy, a Hulk can do it. It was really inspired by when I heard Boggs talking about it on one of the various interviews he did, where he said, I just want it to be like this really simple deck. You've got 4 cards, you lose them at the end of the turn, so just play a card. You just play 1 card and that's it. And so I kind of went into it thinking like, okay, so he's got 4 cards. You can play a 3-cost card or 2 1-cost cards. That's pretty easy. And that was sort of the concept of it. And from the feedback I've gotten, people have said that it seems pretty easy to pilot. And I think you told me you gave it to one of your friends who was quite new, and he seemed to really enjoy it.
Yeah, the times I've seen it in action, it seems to be very enjoyable for the player that experiences it. I just looked you up a bit on the DB and found that you have the other well-known features of Smells Like Teen Angst in the Mosh Pit, which is a Miss Marvel's deck, and then you have a Black Panther leadership deck from memory called Wakanda Forever and Ever and Ever and Ever.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're quite proficient at these deck builds, and so it's great to have you on this series. And so I just wanted, if you wanted to tell us a little bit about what deck you've brought for us on the show this week.
Yep. Okay. So this is another deck that I originally posted a long time ago, but it didn't get a lot of traction like some of the others. But I love the Wakanda Forever and Ever and Ever deck, and I love the Smells Like Teen Angst in the Mosh Pit deck. I think Miss Marvel Aggression is one of my all-time favorite decks, and will be until the game ends or whatever. But the one I brought today is Captain Marvel Protection, and this is still to this day one of my most favorite decks. And when I published it initially, it hasn't actually changed that much with the card pool. There's a few key cards that all seem to just work really, really well with Captain Marvel's kit, and it's just really, really fun and engaging, at least for me to play. And so hopefully, being on here, I can kind of sell it a little bit more, and maybe some more people can try it out and see if they like it too.
Yeah, so you've shared a little bit where the idea sort of came from, but why did you choose Captain Marvel as your hero for this deck?
Yep. So I don't remember exactly why I landed specifically on Captain Marvel for this deck. But normally when I make decks, I just have sort of one idea. For example, with the Ms. Marvel aggression deck, I just wanted to make a deck because I saw the ruling about melee and Embiggen, and it does 5 damage to 2 different targets. And I thought, oh man, that's really cool. I think with this Captain Marvel deck, I just looked at the fact that she wants a lot of energy resources, because you want to build that energy channel a lot. You want energy so that you can heal and draw a card, and then also so you can photonic blast and draw another card. And that always seemed like really fun with me. And sorry, that always seemed really fun to me. And with Nova, you can spend energy resources to deal damage. And I thought that was really cool. This just plays right into it and everything. And it's sort of built from there. I looked at, there's Med Team and Energy Barrier and Preemptive Strike, and they all have energy resources. And they all actually kind of build on the same kind of, like the goal for the deck, which is that it's a protection deck, but I almost never actually defend. I'm going to take damage from the villain, and I'm going to ping it back to him with Energy Barrier or Preemptive Strike. And a minion's going to attack me, but if they've got 2 or fewer hit points, Nova's going to kill them before they can actually attack me. And that was just something that was really, really fun to me. Because a lot of what protection does really well is being able to defend and defend a lot, and have a massive defense, and then you draw with Unflappable, and then you can ready with Indomitable, and then defend for someone else. But with this one, I actually want to take the damage so that I can use that to sort of counterpunch, and yeah, that's just really fun to me.
Yeah, so it seems like Nova is kind of important to that build. Would you say that your deck's primarily focused on single player or multiplayer?
I think it can be single player, because Captain Marvel has quite a lot of threat removal in her kit. She's got 2 thwart, and she has what is it? Crisis Interdiction. Is that Crisis Interdiction? She's got 3 copies of those, and now that there are a few more allies that have come out that are pretty decent at thwarting. In the basic allies, there aren't too many in protection. But typically when I make decks, I don't actually intend it for it to be solo, because I know that that's a possible way to play the game, but that's not really where I have the most fun. I really enjoy playing with someone else. Sometimes I'll play with my partner, and we'll just play together and work out strategies and kind of discuss and say, if I play this card and kill this minion, then you can play that card and kill this side scheme and stuff like that. I feel like that discussion is so important for the game. Even when I play myself, I often play two-handed, but that discussion is still kind of gone. And I'm very fortunate now. I have a play group with my local group here in Auckland, and we've got about 4 or 5 people that play pretty regularly. And I had a 4 person group go through Rise of Red Skull recently, and being able to have those discussions at the table is just really fun. So this deck is basically with my own personal bias in mind of being more part of a group effort and everything, but it can be played solo. It's actually quite strong solo because she does have a lot of really good thwart potential in her kit, and then also protection. You're going to stay in hero for quite a long time, and threats less of an issue.
Yeah, and like you said, also, it seems like there's a lot of interactivity that's a bit different to other decks that exist because there's a lot of villain phase triggers. So you're playing either a lot of cards or spending a lot of energy resources during the villain phase, which is different to how most decks play, except for Black Widow.
Yeah, exactly. I also made a protection Spider-Man deck quite recently, and I think that's, just protection in general has a lot of triggers during the villain phase, and I think that's just so fun for me. The entire crux of this deck is that an energy resource can be many different things. It's already really cool in this game that a card can be, a card you play, or it can just be a resource for something. That's already something that I find really interesting in this game. But now, if I have Nova out, this energy resource in my hand can be 2 damage. Or because I'm Captain Marvel, I can heal a damage and replace itself, draw another card. Or because of Energy Channel, I can place it on there for 2 damage, later on when I do like a really big hit on the villain or something.
Yeah, the versatility, it makes it quite an enjoyable experience. And it seems like you've built a really solid list here. And so I guess I just wanted to ask a few detailed questions about it, starting with how exactly does your deck deal damage?
Okay, yep. The main reason it deals damage is actually Energy Channel because that card is just so incredibly strong. It's slightly less than 2 damage per card because it's also the Energy Channel itself. But it can slowly build up to 10 damage. And the reason I think it's such a strong card is because a lot of times when you're playing champions, you have 5 cards in your hand and you can pay 3 of them for a 3-cost card, and then you've got 1 left over and you can't really do anything with it. This is why I love this deck so much, because you've got Energy Channel and Nova and things like that. You can spend that extra resource and that you were going to throw away anyway or have to keep until the next turn, and then just keep progressing your board state. And so you can do a lot of damage with Energy Channel. Even, sorry. You don't actually have to build it up slowly. There's energy absorption, which is that 3-cost resource card in Captain Marvel's kit. She can build it up like really quickly. I've done 20 damage in 1 turn with 2 different energy channels before. But also to help that, she's got Energy Barrier, and each of those will do 3 damage, but it will also prevent at least 3 damage. And the thing that's really cool is that you can kill a minion before it can attack you and prevent even more than 1 extra damage. But there's also Preemptive Strike, which is very similar to Energy Barrier. It's a little bit less consistent, and I know that since the defense rule change and everything, I can't play it on, my friend who's playing a different character or something like that. I can only use it when I'm the target. But it's still a really solid card. It's one resource and a card for up to 3 damage prevented and 3 damage dealt straight to the villain, and that's pretty strong. There's also a few different allies, and one of the things that's really interesting about the allies is they can stay for a while with med team. So Nova, you don't really want to use him up. You don't really want to use him as a blocker, but he's got 2 attack, which is pretty solid. And with a med team, you can keep him attacking every turn for 2 extra damage, and that's pretty good. And also the photonic blast. I think this is pretty low on the priority, but if you ever have a hand of energy absorption and photonic blast, it just feels so great to play the 2 of those and then draw another card and do 5 damage.
Yeah, it seems like you've packed quite a few different ways that damage can be dealt into the list. And like you mentioned, you've got Nova and Iron Fist to deal additional sources of damage, with presumably the med team directly going on Nova more often than not. You don't seem to have Luke Cage in this list, but was that something that you considered also? Like, did you find you had enough damage with what you've already put in that you didn't need that extra defense, or what was the decision there?
Yeah, Luke Cage was in the original version of the deck because, at the time the card pool was quite smaller, and he has an energy resource as well. But now that the card pool is a little bit bigger, he's a 4-cost card, which is sometimes quite expensive. I know that Captain Marvel is actually one of the best people who can play it. Um, but for me, I think if I have energy absorption in my hand and Luke Cage in my hand, more often than not, I'm actually going to want to play it on energy channel rather than Luke Cage. I think that, he can pump out 10 damage, or actually 12 damage if you use his toughness, and you don't actually use him to block, which is just as efficient as energy channel or slightly more efficient than energy channel. But it takes many turns for that to go off. And so what ended up happening a lot is that I was more often just using him as an extra 2 damage on energy channel more often than not. And I don't actually want to defend with my allies necessarily. I want the villain to attack me so that I can use things like preemptive strike and energy barrier. And Luke Cage was just a little anti-synergistic to that.
Yeah, that's some really good points there. It's almost like he's almost like a haymaker in your deck approach. You could have either card and they do the same thing. So thanks for sharing that. So that's how your deck deals, the damage during a scenario. Does your deck have much in the form of threat removal, or what's your approach to threat control in this deck?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, and this is something I think Caleb and Boggs both have talked about this, something they realized quite early on when they were designing the game, I guess. They realized that protection is actually a really good aspect for dealing with threat. And I remember when the game first came out, I didn't agree with that at all. Because you look at all of the allies that they have, and they don't really have very good allies who are a good threat. There's Black Widow. She can thwart for 2, but she's only got 2 hit points. And then you have Brother Voodoo, who can thwart for 2, but he takes 2 consequential. And then everyone else, they just have 1 thwart and stuff. But you are going to stay in hero form a really long time, and you don't actually need to swap to alter ego to heal. And I think that that's one of the best ways that it can deal with threat. As I mentioned earlier, it has like 3 crisis interdictions. But one of the things that I love so much about Captain Marvel's kit is that a lot of people feel that crisis interdiction is one of her worst cards. And for me, I think that's okay because it's an energy resource. It just goes on energy channel. And now with this deck, it can go on Nova as well. But if you need it, you can play Crisis Interdiction. If you don't have Cosmic Flight out, it's the same thing as To the Rescue. Or if you do have Cosmic Flight, but there's only one scheme you want to remove threat from, it's the same as To the Rescue. And I think that's a solid baseline for dealing with threat. But also, Captain Marvel has 2 thwart, and she never really wants to use her defense. She never really wants to actually defend. So she can just every turn deal with 2 threat, and I think that's pretty strong.
Yeah, I think it's getting discussed a bit more and more as the game progresses, but you're right to identify that there is a lot of value in having heroes that can sustain themselves longer in hero form to potentially prevent an additional activation while in alter ego. I.e., the villain schemes less on average over a game because you're in hero form more often than alter ego. And the addition of Spider Woman too, I guess, would mean that you get another source of 2 thwart and a confused status effect on the villain. So yeah, that's great to see that you've kind of addressed that through your deck building as well. I guess we should probably just address the last thing with how a deck functions, in that you've mentioned that you don't often like to defend with Captain Marvel in this deck. So how does your deck really prevent damage coming in, or how do you dampen the impact of attacks coming your way?
Yeah, so this deck plays, totally differently. Every time I played this deck with a new person, like I said, this is one of my favorite decks to play even now. The game's been out for almost a year, and I still play this deck quite regularly. Um, one of the biggest things that it does is with Energy Barrier, it can prevent 1 damage and then deal 1 damage to something else. And that 1 damage it deals doesn't have to go, for example, if I'm taking an attack from the villain, I don't have to put the damage I prevent back on the villain. I can put it on someone else. And one of the strongest things you can do with the Energy Barrier in terms of preventing damage is, say I have a minion that has, 2 health. The villain can attack me and I can redirect 1 damage to that minion. Then the minion can attack me and I can redirect 1 damage back to it, and it kills itself. And now it's gone. I don't have to worry about attacking it. It's happened several times that if I have a bunch of energy barriers up and a bunch of minions, for example, that by the end of the villain and all of the minions attacking me phase, that some of the minions have died before they could even activate, because all of the minions before it, I've prevented all of the damage they've done, and then they've killed, another one that's later on down the line. And so on the face of it, Energy Barrier is prevent 3 damage and then deal 3 damage. If you don't do it to the villain, you're not necessarily, pushing more for your win condition because you want to kill the villain. But as you kill minions, it makes your job a lot easier. And I think that's a really good way of dealing with it. You can play her helmet, in a pinch. I think maybe sometimes, just depending on the hand that I draw, it might be something that's worth playing at that point. And I think that it's actually not a bad card. I think it gets quite a bad rep because, it's a 2-cost card and it has +1 defense, which is pretty bad compared to Armored Vest. It only costs 1. But I think that if there were a card that gave you +2 defense, it would not cost 2, right? I think it would cost quite a bit more than 2, maybe 3 or 4, even 5 or something. I think the difference between +1 defense every round and +2 defense every round is quite a bit more than just 1 extra resource on the card. And so Captain Marvel's helmet, if you can have the helmet and Cosmic Flight, is actually quite a bargain. And so if you're really desperate, that is an option. But I think I would rather go towards, she has a med team available. And, like I said, I think I'd rather use it on allies like Nova. And of course, like I said earlier, this deck is mainly meant for working as a team. The med teams are mainly there for healing allies for other players. But one thing that Captain Marvel does so well, and it's a reason why you just want to jam pack so much energy, is just her ability on her card, which is what is the name of it?
Rechannel.
Rechannel. Yeah, you just heal a damage. You discard an energy in your hand and draw a card, so you can take your Crisis Interdiction that you're not going to play this turn anyway, or your Power of Protection that you can't get 2 resources from anyway, and then you also draw a card, so you replace itself. So it's basically just a free 1 heal every single turn, and I think that that is just really, really strong.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you that there is quite a lot of strength there with the ways you can stop damage. And I'm with you on the helmet. I quite like the helmet, even if it's just to thin the deck by 1 card.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so that you can rotate through a little bit faster. But the 2 defense in a pinch can be quite handy if you commit to the Cosmic Flight play. So yeah, like you said, there's a lot of flexibility there. And then you've got things like the Energy Barrier, and I quite like what you said there about the minion clearance. It's quite interesting to think that theoretically, if you have Nova in play, you can actually clear a 4-cost minion during the villain phase. So 1 damage from the villain activating off Energy Barrier, 1 damage off the minion activating, and then the Nova trigger. So there's not a lot of minions that have more than 4 health currently. So yeah,
Yeah,
I really like that
exactly.
this really kind of addresses a lot of the core sort of concepts that exist in the game currently.
Yeah, and also what's really cool is if there's a 3 hit point minion, you can kill it before it even activates against you. You take 1 energy barrier and direct it at the minion, and then Nova actually activates before the minion activates. And so if they have 2 or fewer hit points, he can kill them before they can activate, and that's just really good. And with more energy barriers, you can actually kill, higher and higher HP minions. If you've got 3 energy barriers, you can actually kill, what could you do? Like a 5 hit point minion before it can even activate against you. And I feel like that's pretty strong. Of course, there's a lot of buildup. You need Nova and 3 energy barriers, and you need to take a big attack, but you don't really want to defend anyway.
Yeah. I think, it's just an interesting concept to engage with that gives protection a bit of an angle that other aspects don't currently have.
Yeah. Sorry.
There you go. It's okay.
Yeah. So there was one more thing that I wanted to mention, which is in terms of having her sustainability and things like that. So there is endurance in the set, and I think that's a really good card for just a very easy 1 cost and a card for 3 extra hit points. I think that normally the maximum hit points aren't going to be so much of, it's not going to be so much of an impact on the game, but it's just a really good quick heal. Another thing too that I have that I quite like is the Night Nurse. And I think this is a really subtle inclusion. And when I initially made the deck, the Night Nurse didn't exist, and it wasn't really anything I was thinking about. And later on, when I was, sort of remaking the deck, I thought, oh, the Night Nurse is really cool. I'll throw it in there. And then when I started playing, I realized that Captain Marvel's obligation stuns her if you don't exhaust to get rid of it. And I think it surges as well. And so what you do is if you want to play it like this, you can flip to Alter Ego and then just take the stun and then take your normal encounter card anyway. And the stun is kind of annoying because you don't want to be stunned. Sometimes you do want to attack, and of course you have Photonic Blast, and that's pretty good. But the Night Nurse will clear the stun for you, and that actually makes her obligation like quite helpful for you, because you can get that emergency if you're really hurting, like an easy flip to Alter Ego so you can heal and then just flip back. And even if you don't do that, you can still get her Commander, the ability on her Alter Ego side, which is so strong, and it's really sad that you don't get to use it that much in this deck because you're staying in hero form so often. But you can, draw that card and then flip back. And if you have your Alpha Flight Station, you can, draw an extra card from that as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think clearing a stun is actually quite important to this list. It would seem because Energy Channel is also an attack, so being able to make sure you can actually deal the 10 damage seems pretty important to what you're trying to execute here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we've kind of sort of touched on this already, but what would you say overall the deck strengths are?
I think for me, it wouldn't even come down to some sort of technical thing, like, oh, it's so good at dealing damage or it's so good at dealing with these certain kinds of encounters. Like for me, I think the biggest strength is it's just really fun to play. And I think that if you look at a lot of my decks, I think a lot of people would say like, oh, this deck is really strong, it's so good and everything. But for me, I don't actually try to make really strong decks. I just I mean, I do want to do that as well. I do want to make decks that perform well, but my primary focus actually is just making a deck that's really fun to play. And we've mentioned this a few different times. I really love that with Nova and then all of the cards within Captain Marvel's kit with Rechannel and Photonic Blast and Energy Channel. All of those energy resources can be used for something else now. And I really like that there are a few key energy resource cards within protection, like Energy Barrier and Preemptive Strike, that kind of flip things around a bit. Like I've mentioned, this is a protection deck that doesn't really ever defend, right? One of the times I played this deck with one of my friends, his name's Michael. He's in my local play group, and so the first time I played it with him, he's like, "Man, this is such a cool deck. This is really cool." And then maybe the next week or the week after, we were playing again, but he was playing a different game, and I was saying, "I'm about to do this for the first time ever playing this deck," and he got up. He's like, "You're gonna defend?" And I was like, "No, of course not. I'm gonna play Crisis Interdiction." But it was just really funny that for me saying something like that, like I'm going to do this crazy thing within this deck, that he would immediately know that a crazy thing would be, actually using the defend action as a protection deck.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You surprise them by engaging in a non-orthodox way, or unorthodox way, I should say. Yeah, I would agree that fun factor probably outweighs anything else you can bring to the strength category. That's always going to trump things. So yeah, it's great to know that you've built such a fun list. For those that are piloting it though, are there any weaknesses or things they should look out for when playing into any particular scenarios, or any sort of decisions you should be wary of?
Yeah, so I haven't touched upon absolutely everything here. There are a few particular ally choices. So, for example, there's Mockingbird and Nova, or sorry, not Nova, Mockingbird, Iron Fist, and Clea. With Iron Fist, you can stun, and with Mockingbird, you can stun, and with Clea, you can throw her in front of an attack, and she goes back in your deck, and you can bring her back again. But these three allies, they're actually quite low on the priority. I think they're there just to kind of, maybe things are getting a little dicey. You took an attack last turn and it had 3 boost icons, and then it was like reveal another boost card or something like that, or you drew an advance or gang up or something. These are the cards that are going to be there to help you out of those really dicey situations. They're not going to be there for just, all right, I'm going to play Mockingbird. He's stunned. I'm good. Because you actually don't want to stun the villain too much. I originally, when Tackle came out, put that in this deck, and I eventually took it out. Not because it was hard to play, because physical and energy. I actually had no trouble getting enough physical resources. The main thing was that there were too many stuns. I think that if you play this with a more multiplayer, if you have more players, like 3 or 4 players, You can maybe include the tackle to get a few more stuns, but I think what typically tends to happen is that a lot of other players at the table have lots of stuns and confuse and things like that, so you don't really get to play them anyway. Um, so for me, one of the main things is I would say is just don't be afraid of taking a villain attack. There are plenty of outs for you. Just make sure that you save those outs for when you need them. Okay, don't just throw Clea in front of an attack. You want to take villain attacks, because if you don't, you can't preemptive strike it. And if you don't actually take damage, you're not going to be able to energy barrier and be able to clear minions and stuff like that.
Yeah, those are some really good tips. Is there any particular scenarios that you've enjoyed piloting this deck into?
When I put this deck together, I think that we had Green Goblin and Wrecking Crew, and then the core, and so I think it was just those 5 scenarios at the time. And I played Ultron so much, but I think that it's still to this day one of my favorite scenarios. But I think that this deck works so well at dealing with Ultron, because energy barrier is the villain attacks me, and then I just destroy all of the drones before they can do anything. And even if I don't have any extra damage left over to kill a drone, it can just kill itself. And when things get really dicey in stage 3, or with the attachment that goes on the environment that gives them all extra hit points, I can still have, extra options. I can take the energy barrier from the villain attack, and then I can take the energy barrier from the drone attacking me, and I can kill them. And I think that's really fun, because destroying the drones is what you need to do so you can win. And I think what's really fun is sometimes, you go into the villain phase and there's no drones, and then you exit the villain phase and there's like 10, and you just feel like, oh, where's Squirrel Girl, or where's Ground Stomp when you need it? But with this deck, what's really fun is that I can go into the villain phase with 10 drones and come out with like 4. I've actually had like a gain, in my board state. Ultron's had a negative loss in how many drones he has, and that's really fun for me.
Yeah, bringing sort of a deck that is well suited for that scenario is always increases the enjoyability, because I think sometimes it can get a bit overwhelming. But yeah, it certainly looks like that would be fun. I'm actually tempted to give this a go into Kang, to be honest. I think there's some minions in there that are quite high in hit points, and so I'd be curious to see how helpful it is that this deck can kind of punch them down a level before I have to deal with them. So yeah, I think that's going to be where I want to take this list personally. But yeah, certainly I'm glad you seem to find a lot of enjoyment in Ultron in particular.
Yeah, I think I do want to try Kang as well. I haven't had the chance to play this deck recently because my play group, we've just recently gone through Rise of Red Skull, and so I played that for the past 5 weeks, and I really wanted to try Spider-Woman out. And we tried Kang, but then someone else wanted to play Captain Marvel. But I really want to try that as well, because of all the toughness. Energy Barrier is so good at dealing with toughness, and just everything is toughness. Like all the Kangs have toughness, and all the minions have toughness, and everything. So yeah, I think it'll be really, really fun, and also really good at dealing with that scenario.
So something we like to do to sort of close out the episode before we ask one final question is that I'll just quickly do a mulligan for the deck, and I'd just like you to share your thoughts about what you do with the cards that we draw and which ones you pitch back, and just sort of your thinking around that. And usually we do it into the typical scenario of Claw Expert standard setup, if you don't mind. So
Okay, yep.
I'll do the draw now. And so my first hand, you're probably going to like this hand. So I did a card draw on the DB, and it came up with 2 Crisis Interdictions, Avengers Mansion, Energy Absorption, Energy, and then Energy Barrier. So there's a lot of energy.
Oh, wow.
But do you want to talk about your like what would you do with this hand if you drew it in a multiplayer game?
I think one of the first things I would do actually is Crisis Interdiction. I'm not going to play it on turn one. Even against Claw, he starts out with some side schemes. That's not going to be something that I'm going to try to prioritize on turn one, especially because I can flip and then thwart for two. So I think I would actually pitch those and see what new cards I get. I'm going to keep the energy absorption and I'm going to keep the energy because I think those are so good, especially with drawing Avengers Mansion, the starting hand. What I would do with those two extra cards is figure out what I can pitch with energy absorption and drop down Avengers Mansion, draw a card, and then maybe draw a card with Commander and see what really cool, fun stuff I get that I can play with energy. What did you say? There was an energy barrier?
There's an energy barrier as well. So
Yeah. So I would use energy to play energy barrier, and I think getting one of those started right away is just really good because even if you don't have any minions, you can at least start putting pressure on the villain. You can ping away any toughs that there might be and things like that. And then also, as I said, it's a little bit of extra healing because you're not really going to defend too often, and if you do, you've only got one defense.
yeah. So you draw into Night Nurse and Med Team. So I think that seems like a very strong starting hand.
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. I think I'd use the med team as a resource at this point, really early in the game. It costs 3, and I'm not going to see any immediate returns on that investment. The night nurse is a little different. I do know that there's a lot of really annoying stuns and confuses and stuff with Kang, so I might try to prioritize trying to get her out early. And so maybe we'll see what I get with Avengers Mansion and Commander. And then also, like I said, it's really good for turning her obligation into sort of like a free card and a free heal and stuff like that. I think that's really cool. Yeah, that's actually a really amazing hand. I don't think I've ever drawn that well in my own games.
Yeah, I think I know it's one of many sample draws, but the reason we do it on the show is that often I find it does kind of exemplify sort of some of the deck building principles that have gone into a deck. Because that was like a really clean draw. We were able to play some pretty consistent cards and have a really strong turn one. And I think it's nice to see a deck fulfill itself in that way. So thanks for participating in that.
Yep, no worries. Yeah, I think it was really interesting going through that and talking about it. I think I would also say that one thing with this deck, like yes, Nova is really good and Energy Channel is also really good, but they're not necessarily cards that I'm digging for like immediately. It's not something that I absolutely have to have down turn one, especially Nova because it costs 4. Like I actually hate drawing Nova in my opening hand because I have to think, I'm going to take all of my cards in my hand so that I can actually put him down on the board. And it's not necessarily something I'm always going to use, like it can be really good, like we've mentioned many times that you can kill a minion before it can attack you, but that won't be something that always comes up. And you can do 2 damage to the villain, and that's really good. Just spending 1 card for 2 damage, that's an amazing, efficiency. But if it's at the cost of actually being able to play cards on your turn, then it's not actually helpful. I think I would rather, if my whole hand had all of these cards that I was going to play, and then that one resource left made it so that, I had a couple cards left over in my hand, it's actually not efficient anymore. So yeah, there's not really anything I'm necessarily digging for right away. But I think having energy barrier or energy channel in your starting hand is really good because then you can start that right away. If you get Nova early, it's actually really annoying because I hate pitching him. But I really don't want to play him in the first couple of turns because it'll slow down so many other things.
Yeah, I think that's some pretty good core sort of sequencing advice that ultimately establishing a stronger board state. Like if we get the mansion down turn 1, it helps us draw faster into the Nova anyways, and then you have more resources to play with. So, that opening hand was quite a net positive to your game plan anyways.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Drew, thank you for being on the show. As we wrap up, we have one final question we like to ask our guest for the week. And it's often just if you wouldn't mind leaving us with a deck building tip for the community at large.
Okay, yep, a deck building tip. For me, I think it goes back to that question you asked me about what does this deck do so well, and I said that it's just really fun to play. I think that's the main thing for me. You know, this might be a longer answer than you were expecting, but for me, I got my start playing card games like in the 90s, playing like Magic and stuff like that. And I played the Star Wars CCG and everything. And I would actually play the cards like on my own, because I would look at all these different effects, and I would, this stuff was just really fun. I remember there was these Magic cards that would like add counters every turn, and then once it had like 3 or more counters, you could do stuff with it, and it wasn't good at all, but it was just a really fun interaction, and it was something to explore. If you're not aware, the Star Wars CCG, you can kind of build these planets, and you add all these locations, and you can kind of travel all around the galaxy and everything. And it became this game where it wasn't about like winning; it was just about like exploring and having fun and things like that. And so that I think is still present in me now that I'm building decks for champions. I got really, really good at figuring out deck efficiency and stuff like that, being able to figure out like how a deck is supposed to work and how it can perform really well from playing Netrunner. And that's also where I learned how to do like really good write-ups that people seem to resonate with. But I think in terms of the deck building tip, for me, I think the focus needs to be that your deck is just fun to play, right? If you have to go through so many hoops to get your deck to work, or if you have to sit down and think and look at all of your cards, and then the meme of the lady from that TV show, and there's like all the math equations floating above her head, and she's trying to think about the absolute best way to do these things. If you have to sit there and think about all of that every turn, like it's not necessarily fun anymore. You're just doing math homework. Maybe that's fun for you, and that's okay if that's something that you do really enjoy. I enjoy it to an extent, but I think that if I'm sitting here and I'm trying to math out the absolute best efficiency, but it doesn't feel really fun, then it's not a good deck. For me, I think that I can build up energy channel and just throw this giant spirit bomb at the villain for 10 damage. That feels really, really fun to me. And a minion's trying to attack me, and Nova can just swoop in and kill it before he can attack me. And that's really fun to me. So I think my main tip is just make a deck that's really fun. And then all the rest of this stuff kind of falls into place anyway.
Yeah, well, thank you for the sage advice. I think that's a great way to end this episode, and I certainly try to take out the homework, so to speak, in my future decks. So thank you for sharing that, Drew, and thanks for being on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was really fun.